So before we begin with the atomic design, the shared libraries, and even the storybook in general, let me talk a bit about what atomic design is. So it was a concept introduced by Bradford back in 2014 to the front-end world, which basically says to split down your application to like the minuscule level where you can't define things where you can't break down things any further and call it atoms. And then as the context grows around the components, they grow to journey of becoming pages. So atoms is the smallest element possible. Could be a label, could be a text input, could be anything which cannot be broken down further. And then when you put more context into it, and slowly they become into templates. And then when you put APIs into them, that's your pages. So at CreditorWatch, what we do is like, there was one problem with that approach. So Bradford also introduced another tool called Pattern Labs. So that was pretty much installing and doing all of this process in each of your projects. But what we do at CreditorWatch here is we divided that, we split that journey into like two categories, the abstract and the concrete. The abstract is when the designer is in early stages, they're still talking to the customers, the product owner has not laid down their requirements, they're still not sure about what the end product is going to look like, but they still have a basic idea of how the individual elements are going to look like. So they do know how, what's the color template they're following, what's the, I don't know, maybe what's the font they're configuring for their designs, what's the design philosophy they're taking, are they going to go with the material design or it's going to be like Bootstrap. So this is where the designer lays down those foundations, and they also look into the requirements like is there going to be an input, a text input, is there going to be a button, or even something like a bar chart or a pie chart. So these requirements, they may not make much sense of their own because they're like very minuscule. But as we grow further with context, this thing builds up into pages, as we talked before. Like I'll probably switch back to the first slide to explain what I said. So you see, like there's three atoms defined in here. So there's a label, and there's a text input, there's a button, but when they put together, they become the search functionality. And when that gets into the pages level, they probably have like API context to them, and then they make more sense. So this is how you go through the journey of atoms all the way to pages. So atoms may not make sense of their own, but they are the building blocks. They also help creating a shared library for your projects. What I mean by that is when a designer is defining the atomic level of the journey, there's a lot of designs they come across with, design styles. They define the fonts, the buttons. So even the basic functionality is laid out at this stage. So so if you follow something like a SaaS-driven or less-driven philosophy, you can actually start building your shared library, which can be used across multiple projects as a foundation. Similar to the atoms are the molecules. They're just more complex versions of the atoms, where you can combine multiple atoms or combination of atoms and molecules to come up with molecules. Well, you can come up with your own nomenclature about what you want to call them. Could be atoms or molecules, could be something else. But in this case, we just wanted to keep it simple, so we just left it to atoms and molecules. So after a designer has laid some foundations and they come across with like a solid architecture of how the application is going to look like. They have a basic idea of the things. Even the product owner, they know like the rules that are going to get in there. They know what the APIs are going to return. So this is when we define the concrete. So this is also the, so in our case, this is actually the consumer of the abstract layer, wherein the abstract layer is the Storybook repository that we talk about tonight. So, so concrete is when you start defining your templates, your routes. You might have high fidelity components, which are pretty much like wrapper components around your components. There's more context into it. There's more application context, business context, and API context. So that's pretty much the consumer of consumer repositories of this repository. Moving forward into the demo now, I'll probably take an example of one of the items that I've built in here. So, so I'll probably go into buttons. So if you see the Storybook, it lists down all of the components as collections of these stories. So each of the items that you see when you open a particular component, they're pretty much the versions of that component. So you can also if you see the if you compare the Storybook to the other providers, they may not have as many. So the main selling part of the Storybook is basically the add-ons that you can configure on Storybook. So so getting into there, so so there's a bunch of add-ons that Storybook gives you by default, and there's a lot of others that you can add later on. So actions is where you see all of the I'd say the events that are being done on that particular element. They registered here. So if you see like I hovered over the button, it registered a hover element. So if I click over it, it's able to click. It's able to hover find a click event, which mention it there. You can also configure the actions with the console output as well. So if there's any console errors or console outputs, it's just it can be baked right into actions. So you don't have to like inspect and go in there and then check out if there's any error or not. So you can just write in, just go into the actions and it's right there. Controls is a list of props that have been configured on that component. So you see in my example, I have a title, type, loading, action, and all of these are like interactable elements in there. Like you can actually just go in there instead of logging it first, just say like click button. You can see it just updates right on there. You can also, I mean, all of them, you can also configure the type of a particular control. In this case, it's a text. The next one is probably a selection of options like a button or submit, and then the next one goes for like a Boolean if you like to configure that. Now, Storybook is smart enough to configure that for yourself on its own, but sometimes you want to override it and you want to define a particular case for use. I mean, it lets you do that. So next one is the accessibility. So this is another add-on which you don't have to write any code for. It's just built right in. You can just install it, and it tests for all of the accessibility issues with your children. This is particularly helpful for the designers as well, because they can. Because there's as a developer, like you don't really check for accessibility rules unless that's a requirement in the project. But as a designer, that's very much a basic thing that you should be doing. So if you see like in this example, the color contrast isn't probably going with the background. This is not how we use this button in general, but the tool is good enough to know like, hey, the legibility is off on this one, please check your colors. You can see the test cases that have been passed, like the accessibility test cases that passed in this component. And yeah, that's pretty much about the accessibility. So moving forward to the tests. So this is where your unit test cases come into play. So in our case, we use Jest for unit testing. So it's basically giving you a list of the test cases that passed or failed or are in to do. Like you might just give in, some of the test cases might just have like a title and no body into them. So it's so the tool is like good enough to find out like, hey, you didn't write a test case into it, but you really wanted to do it, so please do it. So that's about the tests. Well, a bit more about the tests actually. Like you can also embed any, let's say, the static web pages into this application. For my use case, I've actually embedded the output of the Jest test cases into test coverage, so that anyone who gets in there, like developer who has worked on this repository or not, or anybody who's just trying to make sense of how tested this library is, so they can probably just go in there for like branch testing and functional testing. They can just go into like, I'll take an example of the alert bar, and you can go in there and then it highlights if there's anything missing on the test cases. There's another, so there's like more add-ons actually. Like the next one goes for HTML. This is just an HTML print of this component, how it will load on the real thing, like on the final HTML. Like after JS is done, so after the builds have been processed, everything is done. So this is how it will look like in the HTML. Performance is another nice one. Like we still new to this, new to the performance one. You can define your own performance metrics, wherein, for example, if I want to check like how this button behaves in a stress test scenario, like I can define a workflow and then run the event like 100 copies, and then it will tell you the metrics on how much time it took. And yeah, I mean, you can actually measure anything as you like on the end there. Pretty cool one. We haven't really done much in this, but yeah, really excited about this. The next one is really good. It's about the docs. The docs is actually one of the most used add-ons on Storybook. So it combines all of the things that we talked about into a single page, wherein you can just click on show code to have a copy of this component. If another developer gets on and wants to use this component for their repository, they can just go in there and then copy a use case of like what's the bare minimum they need to configure this component. They can also play with the props, and then it will update the config, and then you can copy it right there. And all you need to configure later is just the events that have been configured on this, and it works. And also it gives you a list of all the extra stories that have been defined for this component. You can see like for the inactive, that's the config, and you can just go ahead and copy it right into your project. So yeah, so that's docs. And so there's other things also you can configure with your Storybook. You can give it some tags if you like. For my case, I've given it a couple of tags for the projects I'm using this in, and then the status of this component, just to notify the next developer, like, hey, this component in this version is stable and it's being used in PPSR, and apply UVC v2. Like, if you want an example like how this works, you can just go right in there and then copy it right from there, or like just have an inspiration, like, hey, because that's what happens in a lot of times. Even if we go to the some of the public libraries, the documentation is always not enough. And that's when people start searching on Google, and then Stack Overflow is the next best friend. Moving forward, I think you can also define background colors for your stories. If you want to see how this component looks with a different background, for mine, I've just defined a light and a dark background. So I just want to see like how it looks with the dark background and water. So that's how it is. You can define as many colors as you want. There's no limit to it. So similarly for the next one, so these are like, there's a few tools for the designers as well. You can go in and look for the exact dimensions of this component, how it's rendered, how the paddings are, how the margins are, everything, you got it. So this is a box layout, and the next one is a accessibility, which is the same tool as you see down in there. So it's just if for some reason you want to check how a person with a grayscale vision or blurred vision will look into this component. Yep, I think, yep, there you go. Not super helpful, but there you have it. So you can also, so this is all by default, like none of these had none of these required any code or anything to be configured, and there is just an add-on, just install it and then add it to the list, and it renders all of them. Pretty easy. So similar to the atoms is the molecules. They're just more complex versions of atoms, as I've talked about earlier. So there could be combinations of atoms, there could be combinations of molecules and other atoms, there could be combinations of molecules. So I'll take an example of the search and filter. So this is one of the components that we use. Oh shit, I shouldn't have that background. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, you can do all of these actions, what we checked earlier with the molecule at the molecule level as well. So you can you can demo them with any combinations as you like. It's because stories themselves are just React components, and you can actually write your docs as interactable documentation. You can go in there. So if you see in here, like this is actually reading from a package.json file, and it's reading for all of the scripts that I've defined in the package.json, and it's and I've thought of commenting on a few of them, like, hey, someone who's getting into this repository for the first time, they want to know like how to compile things, how to update the snapshots, how to run the storybook. Dev dependencies. So all of these are being, produced through React components. So yeah, I mean, something I missed. I was supposed to talk in the first place. So this is the ground rules when the designer starts working on a story on a project. So that's the first thing they would. These are the first things they would actually define: the colors, the fonts, the font weights, and those kind of things. You can also use the storybooks, because they're basically components. You can use them to showcase your color palettes. You can show them. You can show the fonts that you've configured in there for your project. It works beautifully. I think that's pretty much it for the tool. Does anyone have any questions? Yep.
With your Storybook docs, are you extending the automatically generated docs, or are you writing custom Markdown XML?
Oh, this is all the default docs. Yep.
It's completely
everything is default. Yeah. No, nothing at all. Yeah.
Are the other fonts and colors
not really. So there's these ones are over here. They are CSS variables, and then I'm just using because they're basically just components. We just have tiles to show like, hey, this is our general, color guidelines. Yeah. So basically, how it works is it's a Webpack and on the back end. So anything you can configure within the Webpack and the React world, it works. Yep.
compatibility with frameworks, is it mostly React, or we're looking at everything else too?
Yeah, so they do have compatibility for I think about half a dozen frameworks at the moment. Most of the major ones are supported. The Angular, you can build all of these things in Angular, React, Vue, Envoy as well, I guess. Yeah.
Integrating it with a brownfield project, is it simple, or is it more free for like kind of approaches for performance?
Sorry, say that again.
Well, for example, if you have the existing component library, can you just tackle on Storybook quite easily, or will be quite complex to get it working with legacy component libraries?
No, it's sorry. So the question was, if you have multiple component libraries, is it easy to integrate those? Absolutely not. Absolutely yes. Sorry. So it's because they're just React components, and you can just build upon the components. In my example, like most of the components are actually wrapper components around React Bootstrap. So I'm using another library to build my own library. So like a version of that library. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
I've got a question from Ben Buchanan on Zoom. He asks, how much of Storybook can be automatically derived from TypeScript definitions?
How much of Storybook can be derived from the TypeScript definitions?
Yeah, from TypeScript.
In the end, it's as I mentioned, like it's Webpack, and then whatever you configure in there is going to render. Like, so if I get the question right, like if you're trying to see like how different I don't know file types or work with the Storybook, it's endless. So if Webpack supports it, Storybook supports it. Yep.
Does this work? You said it works with Webpack.
Yep.
Where is that integrated with it?
So I can get the last part of.
Does it meet the build of the one? Do you know if it works with it out of the box?
BIT, fine.
Right.
That's it.
I haven't really tested that out, to be honest, but then yeah, sorry, yeah, I don't follow it. Yeah, so
How do you maintain currency between what your designers do and what appears in Storybook? So like, how do you make sure that the component libraries that designers are working with in, say, Figma are the same as the components that you guys have in Storybook?
Yep. That's an interesting one, actually. We thought about that for a long time. So everything over here is maintained in versions. So you can actually release Storybook repositories because they're basically shared libraries in what we're building over here. So you can manage versions in there, like, hey, if a designer releases like, hey, this is version 1.0, and you follow that as a source of truth to build your library. And then if they update, and they probably create tickets or somewhere to follow, and then you can. So every component release, every major restructure, or like a minor bug fix is actually a version release for us. Yeah. Does that?
Yeah, that's
okay,
so,
sweet.
so sorry, just to clarify, so the designs which are assigned a version number are your source of truth, but then releasing with the same version number in your component library.
Correct, yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
I may have missed it on my phone, but breaking changes, how do they actually represent it? Does it show in the thing? Break a pattern, how does Malcolm know about that?
Breaking changes over here is just something which we just it's more of just notifying EOFL as well, because like, hey, if you are upgrading to so-and-so version, these are the list of components that are likely going to fail. I'm not going to show you that, but I'm just showing you what it does. So it's just like a mode of communication. Like for us, it's just a beta at the moment. Like we try out other things to as in like to maybe like I think a better way to do it is going through Git history, and then integrating the Git history into your documentation. Like, hey, what are the major releases? What are the bug fixes and those kind of things?
So like, for example, you do like a Git release and make a different change, and that's some great components. It'll tell you like which components, which versions they were at. In which case, you could, for example, always go back in your source code, reference a specific package.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
That's nice.
Yeah, you can install multiple versions of the library. So if sorry, if a component is missing from a version and you really like the older version, you can actually because in the end, when you install these packages, they are referred by aliases. You can define different alias for that version, and then you can refer it from there. It should work. All right, sweet.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions.